everyone, it's David Thompson with Civil War Monitors Behind the Lines, and I'm joined once more by Peter Carmichael, who is the Robert C. Fluhrer Professor of Civil War Studies, as well as the Director of the Civil War Institute, both at Gettysburg College. So Pete, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great, happy to join you all again.
And a lot going on in Gettysburg this year, obviously, with the sesquicentennial of the battle, but back in March, you hosted really a fantastic conference that I was very fortunate to attend on the future of Civil War history, looking beyond the 150th. So I wonder if you might be able to share with some of our viewers who weren't able to attend maybe some of the highlights and then just some of your general reactions.
Yeah, thanks, David. And you attended, as you noted, and I'd love to get some of your feedback as well. Let me tell you about sort of the design or vision for the conference was an attempt to bring together people who work in the field of Civil War history, but who are rarely, if ever, in the same room together. And so we drew from an array of public historians, National Park Service historians, academic historians, people who do living history, as well as general audiences. And we covered a wide range of topics. In fact, we had more than 150 speakers at this conference. And so they dealt with issues from interpreting the experience of African American to slavery, to the USCTs, to environmental history, to historic preservation, to living history. And in fact, the schedule is still on the Civil War Institute webpage. So it's something to check out because I think it has broad coverage, but more importantly, it brought, again, people together who are engaging these issues, but they engage these issues with very different audiences. And the hope, the intent, was that we could actually learn from each other, that academics and public historians, and that we have the same passion and same commitment to scholarship. But the ways that we engage it, the way that we articulate it to diverse audiences, that is very different. And I think it met with mixed results. I mean, overall, I was very pleased by the turnout and by the participation and by the enthusiasm. But I was somewhat troubled by the reaction to the conference amongst really a distinct minority, and that distinct minority sort of they really created a narrative that I don't reflected the true spirit of the conference. And the true spirit of the conference was something that was deeply collaborative. And what we saw in this conference is a remarkable achievement in which public historians and academic historians have now come together. Certainly there are differences, and certainly there are misunderstandings, and certainly there are criticisms that each side levels at the other that are maybe not on mark. But what the conference really demonstrated was that there's real open lines of communication here. There were a few individuals who sort of drew out the party line, and that is that public historians and academic historians don't get each other. I didn't see it. I don't know what you saw when you were there, but I didn't see that at all. And feel free to disagree with me.
Yeah, no, I didn't necessarily see that coming out of it, that they don't see eye to eye. I think, as you mentioned, that there are some criticisms leveled that are easy things to say at the opposing side, so to speak, and don't really have a whole lot of validity. But I think the key thing that you mentioned is that these lines of communication have been opened. And I guess where I'd be curious to see is how do we continue this dialogue? How do we continue this so that it's not just an event every so often that is, at a wonderful location such as Gettysburg College, but how do we really, in concrete ways? There was a lot of, I guess if I had a fault, was at times we really got into the abstract at the conference, which can happen when you're discussing the possibilities of things in the future. You would expect there to be a degree of the abstract. But I wonder, concretely, how can we actually move forward? And I didn't, particularly from the critics, I didn't see a whole lot of people actually offering some substantive directions. And I guess that was a frustration on my part.
And that is one of the challenges with and this was an academic conference at heart, right? And with an academic conference, you often do get these observations that lack there's sort of a specific plan of action to follow. And so that certainly was a problem. I think the other issue is that for a lot of public historians, they're not familiar with the academic conference format. And the academic conference format is that you evaluate and engage in self-criticism, and that level of analysis can sometimes catch people off guard and they can take it very personal. But I'll be honest, what we saw in March was child's play compared to what you and I have seen in academic conferences. And I'm not suggesting that that's a productive way to go in which you offer scathing critiques of the other person. Some of the specifics that I do hope that will come out of this to continue that conversation, because I think you're right on target there, is that I hope the Civil War Institute during the summer will continue to be able to bring together these diverse audiences. But we have to do it again in very practical ways. The hard fact of it is that public historians, including National Park Service people, they don't have the resources and the time to be able to come to academic conferences. I hope CWI will be able to step into the breach here. I mean, we are embarking upon a development campaign, and those resources, some of them, will in fact be available to public historians, to graduate students, to National Park Service historians, to come to CWI, to present their work, to have conversations so that that can continue to happen. But we need to recognize that we do really different things. I mean, look at our academic journals. Journal of American History. That barely resonates with me, and that's my specialty. So I think we just need to remind ourselves that, look, academics, what we do is we write books and we do research, and sometimes they're on extremely narrow topics. We shouldn't dismiss that, just as public historians have a postage stamp that they've got to interpret and they've got to contextualize. And they've got an audience that they have to shape and conform their message to in a way that academics don't. So, rather than sitting back and disparaging the other and saying, you just write these narrow books and nobody reads them, hell, that's just not true. Adam Goodhart's book on 1861 that's wildly popular, that's great, I would say, popular public history, right? It's not possible unless academics do their job. And there is, I think, a synthesis there, right? The same thing I would say is that, public historians, they've got to shift and change their messages in ways that academics will say, hey, you're selling out there. And they're not selling out. I was on the battlefield a few days ago with my students, and I'm very interested in issues of military discipline. And I've been reading a great deal about what surgeons on the Union side did to men who they suspected of malingering. One of the major issues that surgeons were worried about was masturbation. And they saw that men were masturbating to make the case that they were suffering from wet dreams. If you're suffering from wet dreams during the Civil War, that was a sign of mental derangement. Well, doctors wrote very openly and freely about this. I'm on the battlefield, and I'm with students, and we're talking about why did men fight, and how did the invisible forms of coercion, how do they function? I start talking about doctors, I start talking about masturbation. I can do that with my students. Can you imagine if I spoke to a bunch of families with, kids? I can't do it, right? So, the bottom line to the conference is that I wish people would take a deep breath, stop being so judgmental, stop being so sensitive, and do exactly what you said. Celebrate the fact that we're together and we're communicating. I'm hoping that CWI will continue in a very practical, concrete way, provide the resources and the forum for these conversations to continue, and that we leave those conversations recognizing we share a great deal, but we also do some very distinct and different things.
And I think one thing to note is that I know for a fact that a couple of the conversations that began amongst different panels at the conference have continued afterwards. And I think that's the sign of a productive conference, that it wasn't just people being brought together from public history as well as academic history on this panel, and then come March 16th, they're not going to talk to one another potentially ever again. Is that some of these email chains have followed up and have continued, and I see that as encouraging.
They will, and some of these papers will be part of a book that Joe Titus and myself and Jim Broomall, who's at the University of North Florida, he will be putting that into publication. And so these things, again, they take a very balkanized form in terms of how people engage them, and I think that the conference to sort of either solve problems or sort of offer a Marshall Plan for the future for Civil War history, that's just not going to happen. And we made the mistake of maybe sort of reaching too far with the title of our conference. And I made some mistakes. If I could have done it over again, I would have started the conference by explaining to everyone that in this kind of a setting that there's a lot of reflection. And that reflection often leads to people feeling that they're under attack, and that we need to recognize that this is really a collaborative effort, and that collaborative effort means interrogation and tough questions and challenges. And I think if I had framed it better that way, I think some feelings wouldn't have been hurt. And I'm sorry for that, of course. But like you said, ultimately this was a really good experience for the people who attended, who were able to make contacts and have lines of communication that were never there before. And we need to remind ourselves as a field that if we are going to make a difference, we have to continue to lobby and to be activists. If we want resources, don't sit on the sidelines and whine about it. Either go and raise the money, that means, or contact your elected officials. Let them know that the preservation of our historic sites and the teaching of those stories is important. And so we've got to continue to do stuff on the practical side. And when we do that, we will have the resources and the infrastructure that will continue these conversations.
And one last thing I want to mention about the conference, Pete, just I'm sure you'd want people to know this as well, is that many of the sessions were recorded and are available online.
They were, that's right, and they will be there. We're getting in the process. We're in the process right now of the production of those. C-SPAN also recorded a few of them as well, so that people will have access to them. And in fact, that is one of the things, David, that we're doing here at Gettysburg College and at the Civil War Institute. And as you know, and as your viewers, I hope they already know, we are part of Gettysburg College. We're not a separate entity. And so we're working with the Musselman Library and Special Collections to begin a new collection devoted to issues of commemoration and memory from the 1960s, from the centennial, to today. And so we are accumulating a range of materials, from doing oral histories with the designers, architects, and historians of the new National Park Museum. We are collecting a range of other source materials from preservation groups. And now we have, of course, the videos from the conference. The point being that in a very short time, Gettysburg College will have a body of materials about public history, about preservation, about academic history, that scholars can come and that they will have access to the raw materials of what we've been talking about. There's not a great paper trail for what we do in terms of our business, right? I mean, you can see the work that's been done on the centennial. And Troubled Commemoration, Cook's book is a fabulous book, but I suspect that there were times that the pickings in terms of resources were pretty slim. And so what Gettysburg College and the Civil War Institute is doing is that in a few years, we should have a body of materials here that will be accessible to scholars about these very issues.
And a great resource, to be sure. As people look ahead, perhaps maybe at the bicentennial, they're looking back and they will actually have some true substantive areas of research.
I've saved all of the letters that I received from the March Conference, including my first unsigned letter that was, of course, not especially thrilled with their experience here. I'm saving all those materials because, of course, we want to have scholars to have access to that.
That's wonderful. Now, you've already mentioned it, Pete, but we do have the Civil War Institute in June coming up. Right around the corner, which I'm sure is slightly terrifying for many who see this year just kind of flying by. We're already in May. But I wondered if you could just share maybe some of the highlights of what you'll be focusing on this coming June.
So it's June 21st to June 25th. It is a conference that in many ways has the mission of the March Conference. We bring in an array of scholars, public historians, academic historians, and then we have an audience that's composed mostly of the general public. And this year we are pushing about 400 folks that will be coming. They, of course, will hear a range of talks from scholars such as Carol Reardon, Gary Gallagher, Dick Summers, Brian Lusky, Keith Bohannon. And so we have that sort of standard traditional lecture format, but then we also have a range of battlefield excursions or field experiences. Most of them this year will center on the Gettysburg battlefield. We have a set of distinct tours that follow in the wake of an individual soldier who fought here at Gettysburg. And so these are small group experiences in which the tour guide will not just be talking about the battle, but we'll be honing in on the experience of an individual who has left us a paper trail, some letters. So it's really, I think, moving, and it's, of course, very educational for these attendees to have an opportunity to read the source material on the ground where those men fought. I think it's a powerful educational moment, and it is something that we continue to do at CWI, is to create these small group experiences. We're also doing for the first time something called dine-ins, where there will be one of the faculty, usually an academic, sometimes a public historian, even a few graduate students, who will have a document. And after dinner, they'll spend 30 to 40 minutes with 10 to 15 other people and just having an informal conversation about that document or some type of issue in Civil War history. So it's an event it's quite big. It's massive in terms of its undertaking. That many people, as many speakers as we have probably, I would say, approaching 30 speakers. But we also want to make sure that it has a small group learning atmosphere, and we've done just that with the dine-ins, with the field experiences. And then one evening, we're taking everybody to Pickett's Charge. We are walking Pickett's Charge with Scott Hartwig and a few of the other park historians, John Heiser as well. After we get to Cemetery Ridge, we're going to hop back on the buses, and then we're going to go to the Spangler Farm, which is managed by and preserved by the Gettysburg Foundation, and they're going to see one of the buildings. They're not exactly sure where Armistead passed, but the building where people believe Lewis Armistead at Pickett's Charge, where he died. So it's a really exciting time, and we're going to always give people a different look and angle on the battlefield.
Well, and to be sure, especially the past couple of years, Pete, it seems like you always add a new wrinkle every year, which I'm sure even the veterans appreciate coming back and seeing just a different approach. And if it's anything, I myself, this will be my 9th year going, started as a high school scholarship student, so I can't recommend it enough.
I appreciate that. We're always trying to do new things, and of course what we're really angling toward is to create more opportunities for people to be their own historians. We think that's really critical, and so we're in the process right now of collecting material on Union soldiers, because the records, of course, are plentiful here, of Union soldiers wounded and then spent time in the Lutheran church here in town, as well as the seminary, which I might add, I saw the seminary museum a few days ago. Fantastic. It's wonderful. I can't wait for CWI to go up to the seminary. It's a great new museum. But to get back to my point, we are doing the research on these Union soldiers so that we are going to have tours in the future where a attendee to CWI will go out in the field and they will be able to follow this deeply researched story of an individual man who was wounded. They'll be able to follow him into town, into the hospital, and then, of course, with the pension records at the National Archives, they'll get the long history of that person after Gettysburg. So, yeah, it's a lot of exciting stuff.
Yeah, well, always fun, and perhaps the most important thing, that at least the past 2 years, phenomenal weather on the tours. So hopefully we can keep that going.
Which we didn't have in March. My tour with Hartwig, we had sleet, and we had rain, and we had a little bit of snow, and you could just see the pained looks. Of course, not when Scott was speaking, but when I was speaking, and people just wanted to say, please, shut up, Pete, and let us get back on the bus.
Not exactly what you think of when you think about walking the battlefield of Gettysburg and trying to experience that like the men that were there. That is not, perhaps that weather might be more inclined for Stones River or Fredericksburg.
Fredericksburg or something else like that. You know, and let me, David, if I might just add one other thing about CWI is that people have the understanding that we do just these conferences, when in fact we are deeply involved in the education of the Gettysburg College student. And I want to add that for those of you who were admirers of Brian Pohanka, the famed Civil War historian who also did living history, in honor of Brian, his family has begun an endowment here, and we now help fund seasonal internships at Civil War National Parks. It's called the Pohanka Fellows. We have 17 this summer, and so for your viewers who are going to visit battlefields this year, they could very well run into a Pohanka Fellow. He's a Gettysburg College student, and they're at Harpers Ferry, Fredericksburg, Manassas, Richmond, Petersburg, Andersonville. And so it's a wonderful program, and the point being, again, is what CWI is about. It's not just about these conferences, but it really is about bringing, again, all these people together, including our students.
Certainly a wonderful program. I, for one, actually ran into one of your fellows, Chancellorsville, last year.
Oh, you
driving
did?
up to CWI. So,
yeah, it's wonderful.
You know, it's a very small world.
It's exciting. You know, for those cynics out there who say, oh, young people don't care about history, they have absolutely no clue what they're talking about. And in fact, I am very inspired by the example of our students here. They are very smart, and they're very energetic, and above all, they care deeply about what your viewers care about, and that's our Civil War history, about the preservation of it and the interpretation of it. And for them to be summer stewards of our national parks, I can sleep well at night because of that.
Well, fair enough, Pete. Well, Pete, thanks so much again for taking a little bit of time out of your day to talk with us. Again, everybody, mark your calendars, if possible, this summer for the Civil War Institute. Slot's still open, Pete?
Unfortunately not. We might have
Unfortunately
some.
not.
We might just have some spots open for the weekend lectures, but
All right. Well, he's offered a wonderful teaser then for future years.
Future years.
For those out there that may want to go, and I can't recommend it enough.
Great.
So, again, Pete, thanks so much,
Thank
and
you.
hope to have you back on again soon.
Great. Thanks, man.